This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on PRADHAN MANTRI AWAS YOJANA GRAMIN. The participants are K.V. Prasad, political analyst, and Neelabh Shrivastava, journalist.
The Prime Minister on October 22nd participated through an online medium in a Grah Pravesham event that was held in the Satna district of Madhya Pradesh, where about 4.5 lakh beneficiaries of the PRADHAN MANTRI AWAS YOJANA GRAMIN were handed over the certificate. The scheme aims to provide a house with all the basic amenities to every citizen of the country. And if we talk about Madhya Pradesh specifically, the scheme envisages about creation of about 38 lakh houses in that state that have been sanctioned till now. And also the construction of about 29 to 30 lakhs has been completed. That is at a cost of about rupees 35,000 crore rupees. What is the entire scheme all about?
Well, I think one of the basic concerns of welfare state is to make sure what we call the basic roti, kapda and makan. And in this case, makan is a priority also because it is considered a basic for any human dwellings. So with that in mind, the scheme has been, if you look at historically, India and the state of India and governments have been very active on this front. And if you really go back sometime around the time of partition, the refugees had to be accommodated and this housing scheme was drafted in that. But over the years, this has gone into a problem area for various reasons. And now since the advent of 2014 government of Prime Minister Modi, this scheme was reworked and launched specifically in the rural sector April 2016. And as you mentioned, it has a target to build many crores of houses to ensure certain segment of people in society who are deprived do not have a roof over the head, get this head. And that's the concept, as I said, welfare state.
The Prime Minister spoke about the change in work culture that his government has brought, and also that merging of different schemes is what we understand is envisaged under the scheme. So we have an Ujjwala scheme that ensures certain amount of cooking gas cylinders beneficiaries. So how is this vis-a-vis the housing scheme where, as you said, Mr. Prasad, about ensuring that basic amenities to every citizen of the country is provided, both by way of this Awas Yojana and also other schemes of the government?
If you look at this Awas Yojana, in particular the one for the rural segment, because there are a set of parameters the government has identified and also learned from the gaps that have been identified by the Comptroller and Auditor General report. So that has helped the government to dovetail and make it far more focused. And one of the things the Prime Minister himself had mentioned in the program which you talked about was we no longer give just a bare shell, which means house with four walls. But they're making it a dwelling unit in which you have some separate area for kitchen. That also includes some piped water, includes electricity and cooking gas connection, whether it is from LPG or maybe in cities it could be from the piped gas systems. The whole idea is when you move in, you can actually move in, and also important aspect is toilet. What the government has done, and in a very smart way, if one would look at it, is to draw funds from various schemes which are allocated and bring them under one roof, if I were to say metaphorically. So what you mentioned for like Ujjwala is the LPG, Swachh Bharat includes the toilet, then you have drinking water under the Jal Jeevan Mission. So funds are already allocated. So funds from these are drawn and brought under one roof. And of course, the Ministry of Urban Development or the housing component, which works into it, has made this program into a situation where you have a house where people can move in with some basic amenities. And they don't have to run around or run circles with various government offices or municipalities to get, separate water connection, separate gas connection, electricity connection. So all this comes in under one window.
Whenever we talk about the government welfare schemes in this country, Mr. Prasad, we've seen that the vicious cycle of corruption and red tape that is always associated with these schemes. I think the Prime Minister also spoke about these particular corruption instances where what was promised was not delivered. And that is why there have been certain specifications that have been kept in this Awas Yojana so that any person living in any part, this event was in Madhya Pradesh, but someone living in the hills or other states, so everyone gets his own benefit which is promised to him by the government and the kind of household that he gets. So I think these schemes also speak about the specifications of the Awas or the residential units that each beneficiary gets.
You're right in that sense that this scheme, if I were to quickly run through some of the issues which the government tried to tackle since 2014, the CAG reports and other things which I mentioned, what was being faced was that there was a non-assessment of the actual target housing shortage in the country, number one. Number two, there was a lack of transparency in selection of beneficiaries. Three, the quality of the construction was low. The government had been told that there was a lack of, good technical supervision in the houses, so much so that loans that were sanctioned were not availed, and there was a very weak system for monitoring. The mechanism was not in place. So to identify and make sure all this is addressed to, one of the things you mentioned is the fact that people don't have to run around, as I mentioned, to get various licenses or sanctions or various power load, this water connection, etc., etc. All that comes on separately. The entire thing is electronically monitored. There is an e-platform. In addition, there are some social audits. The Gram Sabhas are available for dealing with it. Then you mentioned about this component of what is known as climatic conditions. Local conditions are applied in the house. Otherwise, what was happening earlier was a uniform, somebody sitting in the building offices and would draw up a plan, and that house was to be constructed all over. Now, specifically, for instance, in a disaster-prone area, you have a disaster-resilient material which is being used. Or in climatic conditions which are harsh, you have a different kind of building material required. And this also means the funding pattern. For instance, earlier the loans were up to only 70,000. But now it is 1,20,000 in the plains, and in the hills and the difficult area it has gone up to 1,30,000. And this is a central state scheme in which 60% is center and in the plains 40% is state. In the Himalayan region, the northeast and the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, this is in the 90-10 ratios. And in the UT territory, it is 100% the central funding. So you see the government has made it more targeted. And as I said, they have looked into the socio-economic factors. There are various parameters that, there should be no adult between such age groups like 16 to 60 years. Families who are headed by a female have different parameters. Families that do not own land, families do not have property, house, they don't have vehicles, they don't have agriculture equipment. Because this idea is to ensure that really deserving people are getting it and not somebody is not cornering the benefit that the government is wanting to deliver under a poverty elevation by manipulating data.
The Prime Minister also spoke about the culture of reverie or the freebies, Mr. Prasad, during his address to the beneficiaries in Madhya Pradesh. We all know is going on in the country, what the political parties promise in their manifestos and what actually is delivered. So what has been the idea of the government vis-a-vis when it comes to freebies and balancing the act between ensuring freebies or probably ensuring basic amenities to the people, some of them which have not been available to them even after 75 years of independence?
I think the Prime Minister has flagged this issue on many occasions in the recent times to kind of distinguish between what is the social welfare for the welfare of the people and masses in terms of, as I said, food, clothing and shelter. So, for instance, I think the very speech you were mentioning, he talked about how much during the COVID times and the free ration distribution has benefited a large segment of society due to the initially hit because of COVID, then the kind of, so make sure they sustain themselves. Similarly, now if you move on to a welfare scheme, as I said, poverty elevation has been a challenge because the whole idea is to lift so many numbers of people who are in poor conditions, to lift them up. And one of the areas is targeting schemes, allocating funds, and making sure that the targeted beneficiaries are actually getting the advantage of the scheme. It's no longer that the scheme is drawn into the one of the big buildings and plans of the ministries, but eventually it percolates down, goes down to the people, and they benefit. For instance, the housing scheme which you're just talking about, the Ujjwala scheme which is reaching people for the last few years, in particular, there has been a focus. Revenue, of course, is the largest that political parties we have seen for the last many years trying to woo the voters by promising something free or at a cost of subsidy. The question is who is going to subsidize? Eventually, the money, if it is subsidized through a certain segment, comes from the taxpayers' money. And we, in this country, we have seen there's a very small base of income taxpayers. Of course, the indirect taxes are a different kind of collections where the figures are coming up. So that is the reason why I think the Prime Minister has been repeatedly talking of it. The Supreme Court got seized of it. The Election Commission has just taken note of it in the recent elections coming up in Himachal and maybe when the dates are announced in Gujarat. So I think there is a very serious thought and debate to kind of distinguish between what is welfare economics and economics where you are trying to, if I were to say, woo the voters by offering something which looks very difficult in the long run to sustain.
Mr. Prasad, the Prime Minister very specifically spoke at length about the employment opportunity generation through the government scheme, including the PM Awas Yojana. So that the stress of the government has also been on this employment generation, for which the opposition has also targeted the government, saying that there have been not many jobs.
Well, I think what the government is using is available schemes and dovetailing into various welfare measures. For instance, you mentioned the Prime Minister elaborated how in particularly limestone would be beneficial. Now, if you look at two things that the scheme also looked at, when I mentioned to you the question is there was lack of technical supervision, there was a low quality. One of the things the government reworked the scheme was to make sure that you have adequate trained manpower or personnel who would help in construction work. And that they did by a certification course which was pan-India, so that you have skilled masons available and they were given training and they were given certification. So it is some kind of a standardized training. And what would that yield into? For instance, he did mention what is known as, it's very common in India to call one of the most skilled masons as Raj Mistri. So the Prime Minister did mention that women are known as a Rani Mistri, where they in turn can train many people, having been trained and having worked into skilling themselves and skill others. That develops their economy cycle is different because they make money. They don't have to travel very far away for work, probably in the district in particular where the houses are being made. So when there's more money in the pocket, there's a tendency to spend, which obviously cycles the growth. The economic activity kicks up and that leads to it. And I think the Prime Minister did mention portions of that in his speech. So it's very important to generate that economic activity, that money is available. And of course, one of the part of the scheme is also very important that people who draw benefit under the MNREGA, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, in the rural area, a certain number of can be done under this scheme. So you see, people are benefiting in terms of economic activity, and then you restart a cycle of activity which leads to economic growth.
Talking about the entire scheme of the government of India, Mr. Prasad, PRADHAN MANTRI GRAMIN AWAS YOJANA, or the welfare or the schemes that are being done by the government. So what exactly is the idea of the government? How do you see different welfare schemes, like borrowing your word of dovetailing these schemes? Now, 75 years of India's independence, we are celebrating it as the Amrit Mahotsav. The government has given that motto.
Yeah, Nilab, I think two things we must remember. I think when 2014 Prime Minister made it clear that he wants some milestones to be achieved by the time India turns 75, by the time India turns 100. So, of course, we had unprecedented situation where the whole world was under the impact of COVID. So if we were to take away the 2021, 22 period, which was fallout, there was certain lag because of this unprecedented global health pandemic. But having said that, now the schemes have again been picked up pace. And if you were to look at, for instance, if I were to just give you some figure which one could see, of the 2.47 crore houses that they plan to, the actual housing target is something like 2.71 crore houses in the rural segment, of which almost 2.47 have been sanctioned and 2.3 have been completed. You just gave me figures of Madhya Pradesh. Now, various states, if you look at the data available with the government, there are very clear parameters that have to be set. And as I said, there is a constant monitoring mechanism which is now available on an electronic platform. Other than the social audit which is being done at the community level, at the member of parliament level, the legislators level, the state government and the national level. The whole idea is, unless we kind of target, and as you mentioned also the fact is Jal Jeevan Mission. Now that mission is to ensure clean piped drinking water. Now there's a different scheme in which it has been working. They kind of make the community own the scheme. The whole idea is it is not a government scheme, but eventually it is people's scheme because people are going to benefit. And if they learn to run it themselves, I think the word they use is Pani Panchayat. So that is the whole idea, is make people, I think one of the biggest focus, and Prime Minister Modi has always been talking about, is make schemes, driver of the scheme would be when people own it up. Instead of, it's not a government program. It's a program meant for the people and they have stake in it and they carry it forward.
Thank you for sharing your point.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on PRADHAN MANTRI AWAS YOJANA GRAMIN. The participants were KV Prasad, political analyst, and Neelab Srivastav, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.